All right, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting on a Wednesday for a change. Due to the holidays starting on Friday and Saturday, and actually tomorrow also, Holy Thursday, I thought it'd be best if we held a meeting today. And also I made it at 8 o'clock instead of 7 because the Giants were playing a day game. And every game is usually 3.5 hours. And today it was 2 hours and 11 minutes. So with that being said, I just want to wish everybody happy Easter, happy Passover, and hope you all have a healthy and joyous holiday. Tonight we have a legendary author about baseball announcers, Curt Smith. And we're going to turn over the mic to him in a few minutes. I just want to go over some stuff. Next week, there'll be no meeting because the Giants will be in town to play the Mets on Monday to Thursday. People have asked me about, did you buy, group tickets? And honestly, with the lockout, that was not feasible. So I'm planning on going hopefully on Monday and the day game on Thursday. The next meeting we will have will be April 28th with Lou Hernandez. Lou wrote a great book on John McGraw. So we'll be seeing each other 2 weeks from tomorrow. And one final note, today was a little rough day for me. Today was the anniversary of my dad's passing. He died 19 years ago. He was a huge Giant fan, and he would have loved being part of your group, our group, whatever it is you want to call it. And just wanted to reach out to you guys, let you know that, and I'm dedicating this show to my dad's memory because, I wrote something today about the great one. The great one was not Jackie Gleason. It was Lou Mintz. My father really was a special guy, and anything I have is due to him. So with that being said, we are very, very proud to introduce really the maven of baseball announcers, Curt Smith. Curt tonight is going to be talking about the New York Giant announcers. And he will also field questions about, any other announcer you have a question about. But he also is going to come back and see us later on this summer to talk about the Giant announcers in San Francisco from '58 until now. So tonight we'll have the New York and whoever else. He has actually 3 tremendous books about announcing and the announcers who, there was a time when radio was king. Now most of us watch the games, but he'll be talking about both radio and the TV announcers. So Curt, welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Thank you so much for attending and speaking to us tonight.
Well, Gary, you're very kind, and I certainly can empathize, I think, with your poignant tribute to your dad. My dad had died in 2004, 18 years ago. And we grew up in Rochester, New York, which at that point, when I was very young, was the St. Louis Cardinals Farm Club. Dad was an inveterate Redbirds fan, and he thought Stan Musial probably was second only to religious figures in terms of their walking on water. So it's a delight to hear about your dad. Baseball is, of course, famously the sport of fathers and sons, and I'm very happy that you did that. Great to be here to talk about the marvelous broadcast legacy of the New York Giants. I especially want to thank Gary for his wise counsel. When he invited me to be here, I asked him what to talk about. He paused, then said, "Oh, talk about 25 minutes." So I will. And then I'd be glad to answer any questions about the Giants, baseball in general, or even books of mine. Ask anything you like. As many of you already know, radio play-by-play began in 1921 on KDKA Pittsburgh. TV Balls and Stripes debuted in 1939 at a favorite place of yours, Brooklyn's Ebbets Field. Please feel free to boo. Actually, I'm wearing a blue tie tonight, not in honor of the Brooklyn Dodgers colors, but because it's an official baseball Hall of Fame tie. So in any event, since then, since 1939, it is a fact that more Giants announcers have entered the National Baseball Hall of Fame's museum broadcast wing than any other team. Each year, the Hall of Fame presents the Ford C. Frick Award for Broadcast Excellence. Fully a dozen voices have broadcast all or part of their career for the Giants of New York and/or San Francisco. I'll talk about Frisco in August, as Gary mentioned. But for now, think of that one statistic. Of the 46 men receiving the Frick Award since the award began in 1978, 12 have aired the Giants, the most of any franchise. I'll try to mention them all. If I don't, I'll get to it in August. But more to the point, feel free tonight to ask me questions in the Q&A about these or other great broadcasters, voices who climbed radio TV's baseball stairway to heaven, turning us to the game. I think this is true probably of all of us when we were very young. The great broadcaster, irrespective of team, speaks in vivid tints and bold pastels, using language like Jascha Heifetz did a violin. The great broadcaster knows what he is doing, as even non-Giants broadcaster Dizzy Dean said, intentionally saying, a runner slid into third, or my own favorite, that batter, he said, he's standing confidentially at the plate. Incidentally, Yogi Berra could have been a great broadcaster too. How could he not with Berra-isms like these? At a party, a woman told Yogi, you look pretty cool tonight, Mr. Berra. Thank you, ma'am. Yogi replied gracefully, you don't look so hot yourself. The great broadcaster makes us forever love the game. Witness the Giants' voices who now deck the hall in Cooperstown. Mel Allen, the voice of the Yankees, did the Giants in 1939-40 and 1942. Russ Hodges, of course, called baseball's greatest moment, as any good red-blooded American knows. Ernie Harwell, Jack Brickhouse, Bill King, Lindsey Nelson later did the Giants. The great Lon Simmons is also in the hall, as are Arch McDonald, Al Helfer, Tim McCarver, Al Michaels, and John Miller. What a lineup, all of them in Cooperstown, USA. The Giants took to radio in 1939 on WABC New York, one of the great stations then and now. That city's three teams then finally allowing the wireless after banning it to protect home attendance. That year, Red Barber became Brooklyn's voice, just as Allen and McDonald became the voice of the Giants and Yankees. In time, Mel did 20 World Series with the Southern voice that a florist must have decorated. Said a writer, if Mel Allen sold fish, he would make you think that Puccini wrote the score. McDonald, 1939's other Giants voice, was a former soda jerk, refrigerator salesman, and fight referee who reached the Polo Grounds from Washington, earning the name the Rembrandt of the recreation. By then, most big league teams aired most home games live, but costly line charges precluded live away coverage. So the quandary, how to broadcast from the road without being on the road? Answer, you recreated games by wireless telegraphy. Say the Giants played in Chicago. A Western Union operator at Wrigley Field sent data seconds after each pitch to their studio hundreds of miles away in New York. Mel and Arch McDonald might get a message reading B1L. What does B1L mean? Well, of course it means ball one low. Next pitch, all you received, the announcer did, was S2C, strike two called. That was it. They then recreated a game they had never seen. To mimic bat hitting ball, they used a stick to whack wood. The studio soundtrack simulated a heckler, a hot dog vendor, and the roar of the crowd. When a great play was made, Arch McDonald even warbled a country ballad, also sung by Gene Autry. They cut down the old pine tree, sort of a golden oldie before its time. Recreation's most famed practitioner was the future US president. In his first major gig in the 1930s, Ronald Reagan voiced the Cubs on WHO Des Moines, the only one of 4 stations there carrying the Cubs to recreate, not broadcast live. Once the wire broke, Reagan paused but didn't panic, knowing that if he switched to transcribed music, a listener would turn to another station doing the same game live. So quickly, a solution came to him, like Saul on the Damascus Road. The one thing not to make next morning's box score. It is, of course, foul balls. A batter can hit 2 million fouls and still have 2 strikes. So for the next 7 minutes, Reagan had the batter foul to the left, to the right, behind the plate, everywhere. To buy time to fix the wire, Reagan invented the pitcher calling time to tie his shoes. A tornado neared. A skipper was bounced. None of this happened, but if you were listening at home, who knew? Finally, the wire revived, and Reagan began laughing. It read, "Batter popped out on first pitch." Years later, now president, he said, mixing fact and fiction, what greater training for politics? Many still recall Les Kiter, I'm sure many of you do, recreating the Giants and WINS in 1958 through 60, after the club left town. Like you do, Les kept the Giant pedigree alive, his play-by-play so electric, coining the phrase a bloop and a blast, that many had no idea that Les was in fact not at the game, airing it live. Kiter began his career in Hawaii after World War II. Then he moved to Honolulu, then back to New York, then back to Honolulu, appearing on TV's original series, The Great Hawaii Five-0 with Jack Lord. Les's originality as an announcer, matching a part where polo was never played, but baseball truly reigned. I refer, of course, to your second home, the Polo Grounds. The right field pole stood 258 feet from the plate, earning the snarky term Polo Grounds home run. A 21-foot upper deck overhang made left field's 279-foot line seem even closer. Center field resembled a green Sahara. Ask Willie Mays, ask Vic Wertz. The Giants moved to Coogan's Bluff, but just before World War I. In or just after the Second World War, Connie Desmond, Don Dunphy, and Jack Brickhouse did Giants radio. Frankie Frisch began their TV coverage in 1947, wailing, famously or infamously, "Oh, those bases on balls." 2 years later, Al Helfer succeeded Frisch on flagship TV station WPIX. In every sense, Helfer was a lot to handle, starting with his size. His parents were 5'3", that was his mother. His dad was 5'9". Helfer ballooned to 6'4" and 275 pounds. Born in 1911, Al recreated Barber's 1930s Reds, went to Mutual's WOR, New York, and at 28 joined Red on Brooklyn radio. Named by Barber Brother Al, Helfer then joined the US Navy, his 1943 signal launching the Allied invasion of Sicily. Radio's Cavalcade of America starred Alfred Drake as Lieutenant Commander Helfer. War over, the war hero Helfer did 1945's Giants, Yankees, and Mutual's World Series. Next year, Mel Allen dumped Al for Russ Hodges at Yankee Stadium. Hodges, who we're about to revisit soon. By now, Mutual had 700 outlets, the largest network in the country. Yet because St. Louis was baseball's southern and westernmost big league team, 7 in 10 US homes, if you can believe this, lacked any big league radio coverage. Mutual's solution, a live game of the day, becoming a phenomenon across the land. Helfer announced 6 games live each week. He was the original frequent flyer. Every day but Sunday, each game from a different city. On Sunday night, he boarded a plane leaving home. Next weekend, Al returned home, as he put it, got fresh laundry, and left before the door shut. On network radio or TV, Helfer did 6 World Series, including the Giants in 1951 and 54, and 9 network All-Star games. By 54, he'd traveled, as he put it, about 4 million miles for Mutual, his doctor making him resign. Restless, Al voiced the Dodgers again, the Houston Colt 45s, then the Oakland A's. Once Reggie Jackson homered, with the A's' Ted Kubiak on third base. Al said, describing the blast, and Kubiak will score easily on the play. I think he would, since it was a home run that was hit. As you can see, nearing his end, Helfer could still stir up a fuss. In 2019, the Hall gave him the Frick Award, the only voice except for Connie Desmond to air all three pre-1958 New York teams, Dodgers, Giants, Yankees. On Game of the Day, Helfer would interview the true voice of the Giants, now and perhaps then, and perhaps always, Russell Pleasant Hodges. Born in 1910, a lawyer who passed the bar but never practiced, Russ Hodges recreated 3 clubs before doing the Senators live. In 1946, Russ joined Allen with the Yanks. Together, they launched TV and live 154-game radio coverage, both of which set a precedent. Whereupon their ad agency began two-way commercials. They were that popular, Mel and Russ. At one inning's end, Mel would ask a question. Next inning, Russ replied with a prepared answer. Once Allen changed the question without telling Russ. Hodges then gave a scripted answer. It made no sense, which was the idea. In stitches, Russ ran out of the booth. Allen dubbed Hodges my favorite partner. No ego, so easy to work with. After 3 years in the Bronx, Russ replaced Frisch as the Giants' TV voice. A writer recalled, the Dodgers barber gave the listeners corn-fed philosophy and humor. The Yanks' Allen told you more about baseball than you cared to know. Meanwhile, the Giants' Hodges, said the writer, told it the way it was. If Mel Allen played the Metropolitan Opera and read the Grand Ole Opry, Hodges pounded piano at the nearest blue-collar bar. Once working football, a tired barber said, and now for the second quarter, here is Rush Hughes. Tongue-in-cheek, Hodges replied, thank you, Red Baker. Barber was not amused, but then Red was very seldom amused. Russ also ferried boxing for NBC, despite, or because, Hodges said, he believed in not keeping the listener on the edge of their seats. He was good company, not electric company. Come 1950, the Sporting News named him Announcer of the Year. That year, a record 6 future winners of the Frick Award, the Yanks' Allen and Curt Gowdy, Brooklyn's Barber and Vin Scully, and Giants' Hodges and Ernie Harwell, all of them calling baseball at the same time in one city, New York. How's that for many happy returns? Russ said, I know I don't have a good radio voice. On the other hand, he added, I know sports well. Well enough to soon make sports all-time most timeless call. Harwell had been, or would be, the first sports voice baptized in the Jordan River, traded for a player, and telecast coast to coast. He also sang a duet with Pearl Bailey, had a racehorse named after him, and was sports editor of the Marine magazine Leatherneck in World War II. The wonder that was Ernie Harwell wrote 80 song lyrics, including Move Over Babe, Here Comes Henry, and penned the classic baseball essay, The Game for All America. He also aired the big leagues for 55 years, including and especially the 1950 through 53 Giants. At the Polo Grounds, Ernie and Russ broadcast from a remote booth without a toilet. Urinating in paper cups, they put them in a corner. One day, a visitor accidentally kicked the cup over, leaking liquid into the lower boxes. Hey, an usher said, we're getting complaints. People said to quit spilling beer. Russ and Ernie said that they would, noting the beer was used. In 1951, New York drank to the shot heard around the world. People of a certain age know where they were when Bobby Thompson swung and Russ Hodges immortalized his blast. Together, if we may, let's play it again. The 1951 Dodgers and Giants were scheduled to play each other 22 times in the regular season. Radio and TV coursing through the city. On August 13th, Brooklyn led by 13 and a half games. By September 20, the Giants trailed by 6 with 7 left. Urban myth claims the Dodgers folded. The fact is this: Brooklyn finished 24-20 to the Giants 37-7. On the last day, the Giants won in Boston, then trained back to New York following their last regular season game. Hodges used the train telephone to call the team office monitoring Brooklyn's game that day in Philadelphia. The Dodgers fell behind 6-1, then rallied to win 9-8 in 14 innings. Jackie Robinson fittingly homering. A day later, the best of 3 NL playoff began. A world, said Russ, focused on our rivalry. Mel Allen added, think of it, 3 New York teams out of the big league 16 remain, all from New York. One's already in the series, is of course the Yankees. The other 2 tied to win the National League pennant. What happened next, then and now, is wonder work, sheer wonder work. Dodgers-Giants was then sports' greatest rivalry. The United States was the world's colossus. Possibly America never believed in itself so totally as then. Likely baseball never meant more to America than then. It is not hard to see why. The Dodgers-Giants playoff became the then most widely aired event in radio and TV history. 6 networks, count them, 5 of them radio, aired at least one playoff game. Mutualist game of the day, Liberty Broadcasting Systems game of the day, Dodgers radio, the Brooklyn Dodgers recreated radio network, the Giants WMCA radio network, the CBS TV network, the latter doing Game 3 from the Polo Grounds. Talk about your 24/7 coverage. 4 years earlier, in 1947, Americans had owned just 17,000 television sets to 58 million radios. But by 1951, TV had become an irresistible force, 10,000 sold daily. Radio remained an immovable object, to many thinking TV a passing fad. Good friends Russ and Ernie split the series between WMC radio and TV's first national sports telecast on CBS. We tossed a coin, Harwell laughed, and old Russ is going to be stuck on radio. So I was feeling a little sorry for him. All these radio networks, Harwell said, and I was going to be on TV. And I thought I had the plum assignment. Well, Ernie's plum soon spoiled. The Giants won a 3-1 opener. Next day, as we all know, Brooklyn countered 10-0. A day later, Thompson batted at 3:58 p.m. Dodgers 4-2, home half of the ninth. For decades, any schoolboy knew the script. Ralph Branca threw a 2-on, 1-out pitch. You know the rest. There's a long drive, Russ began. It's going to be, I believe, the Giants win the pennant. 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 Bobby Thompson hits into the lower deck of the left field stands. The Giants win the pennant. And they're going crazy. They are going crazy. Oh. The bulletin spread instantly from the Polo Grounds to the nearest bar, bowling alley, church, any place where people gathered. At the Polo Grounds, confetti swirled like snow. The Dodgers staggered off the field. Meanwhile, Russ ate noise thick enough to chew. I don't believe it, he resumed. I do not believe it. Bobby Thompson hit a line drive into the lower deck of the left field stands, and the whole place is going crazy. The Giants, he said, picked Bobby Thompson up and they're carrying him off the field. Here we are, 2/3 of a century later, his blast remaining, baseball's rock of ages call. One writer falsely said Hodges stood on his chair for 2 minutes screaming, the Giants win the pennant. Barber, surely red-faced envious by now, dubbed Russ unprofessional, to which Lon Simmons said, that's not true. Russ was dramatic, but gave the essentials: score, meaning, who won, and how. The shot prophesied Russ making Cooperstown in 1980. Harwell, honored a year later, never forgot how on CBS he had instantly said, "It's gone." Then he paused, thinking perhaps better of his call. Brooklyn's Andy Pafko, after all, seemed glued to the left field wall. Uh-oh, Ernie thought, suppose he catches it. Suppose indeed. Sadly, Harwell's TV call was never saved. By contrast, Hodges was preserved by a waiter named Lawrence Goldberg, who had his mother tape the ninth inning on a then rare reel-to-reel recorder. "What did I get?" Harwell said of TV. "Anonymity." What did Russ get from radio? Immortality. Ernie joked that only he and Mrs. Harwell knew that he had also done the most famous call of all time. Rival clubhouses at the Polo Grounds stood back to back of deepest center field. Said Vin Scully, we could hear the Giants whooping it up at their victory celebration next door. In our clubhouse, it was like a morgue. In shock, the Dodgers' Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese lay on the rubbing table. Finally, Pee Wee raised his head saying, "You know what I really don't understand?" Jackie said, "What?" Reese answered, "How after all these years playing baseball, I haven't gone insane." The Giants lived on the miracle of Coogan's Bluff till reality reappeared. By their 1954 pennant, attendance had plunged 500,000 since '48. Folks watched on local TV, said Hodges. Near the Polo Grounds, people were getting mugged. Fantasy again bloomed in 1954's series opener. Mays catch-off works, over the shoulder, a time zone from the plate. NBC's Brickhouse called it, then noted the 453-foot mark in center field, asking, "Russ, the ball itself, you know this ballpark better than anyone else I know, had to go about 460, didn't it?" I just said, "It certainly did. And I don't see how Willie did it, but he's been doing it all year." So well, in fact, that Mays was named the league's most valuable player in that same year of '54. The Giants swept the series. Attendance fell further. In late 1956, Russ hired announcer Jim Woods, just axed by the Yanks. "At a time like this," Jim said, "you need someone to reach down and save you." Russ did. "He was the greatest human being," said Jim Woods, "I ever knew." Woods aired the '57 variety of Giants baseball. Meanwhile, the team prepared to leave one coast for another. That May, the National League said the Giants or Dodgers could leave by easy scheduling, a cynical euphemism for taking the other team west. In August, owner Horace Stoneham said, "We're sorry to disappoint the kids of New York, but we didn't see many of their parents out there at the Polo Grounds in recent years." The World Telegram newspaper screamed, "It's official, Giants to Frisco." On September 29th, 1957, 11,606 mourners braved the teary Polo Grounds farewell. Pirates 9, home team 1. For baseball, for Giants fans everywhere, moving day had truly come. Thank you very much.
Curt, that was fabulous. And we cannot wait for you to come back later in the summer to talk about the San Francisco announcers.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
The announcers of New York and San Francisco are quite different, as many of you know. Low comedy and high comedy has been the mark of Giants announcers ever since the move to the West Coast. I won't steal my thunder except to say you probably know them all as household names, extended members of the family, even more than I do. So I look forward to that enormously. And may I say that the Polo Grounds, even though I think as a Red Sox fan, I'm a little young to remember the New York Giants, but I think that the Polo Grounds to me remains the single most iconoclastic and therefore most interesting ballpark in baseball. John Miller, I don't know if he still has this photo in his home in Half Moon Bay, but I know Vin Scully has. Vin Scully had one baseball photo or picture rather in his house, and it was of the Polo Grounds. And the reason is, as many of you know, is that the voice of the Dodgers, I think doubtless the greatest voice in baseball history, Vin Scully, was a Giants fan for the formative years of his life. He grew up in northern Manhattan. His hero was a fellow left-hander by the name of Mel Ott, and he would go to the Polo Grounds and watch Ott pump home runs off the short porch right. So everyone has a little Giants, I guess, attached to their DNA.
Curt, first thing, you have many celebrated books on announcers, Voices of the Game, Memories of the Microphone, and others. Where could our group, best place to pick up any of these books would be where?
Pardon me. I think my website would be the easiest way to do so. Curt Smith, CurtSmithAuthor.com.
Thank you so much.
Curt with a C, otherwise it won't reach it.
I learned that. Curt, one other thing. You know, I guess I'm getting a little old now, and I'm getting to be like that guy on the porch who I didn't think I'd ever be. Is your next book about the demise of the announcers of the game? Because,
well, you know, it's interesting. I just finished doing the requisite publicity tour for my last book, which was out earlier this year, or late last year, I said. Actually, both. It was titled Memories from the Microphone, the first century of baseball broadcasting. And it was a history of the game going back to 1921, that first game at KDKA. And it was an official publication of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and museum. So, you know, I was traveling in the best of company in that sense. So people can get that book or Voices of the Game, or I'm trying to think of some other voices, baseball books, but they're all there. I've done 18 of them. Some even have words to go with the pictures. And you know, it's something that I grew up with in upstate New York. They didn't have a major league team in Toronto at that point, and the Mets were in their infancy, barely. So the Yankees were still riding high. This would have been in the late 50s and particularly the early 1960s. But it was a long heist to go down to New York City to watch a ball game. So to follow baseball, and because I've always loved language since I was young, I had to do so. Not had to do so. It was actually a great privilege for me to do so by the Voices of the Game on radio and television. And I mentioned Dizzy Dean. He was the name of the CBS television game of the week on Saturday and Sunday. Lindsey Nelson was the voice of the NBC Major League Baseball on NBC, as I said, the same time on Saturday and Sunday. So you could literally listen to the great craftsman of English, Lindsey Nelson, who polished the English language. And then I could listen to Dizzy Dean, who mutilated the English language. It was great, both sides now. And I would go back and forth. And Bob Wolf was also that great nature's nobleman, to quote Shakespeare. And Bob would be the voice of NBC as well. So it was a marvelous upbringing in baseball and the Voices of the Game. Mel Allen did the Yankees. At that time, I had the bad judgment to be a Yankees fan as a kid. I was surrounded by Yankee fans all throughout upstate. It's rabid Bronx Bombers, always has been. It's hopeless. But as a Red Sox fan, I say that. But it was marvelous. I got to listen to Mel Allen, who my belief, at least, in his prime, which sad to say wasn't long enough, I think he may have been the greatest ever, simply because of his instrument of a voice. What a magnificent voice. And as those of you who were alive then, and that's all of us, I think, you couldn't go anywhere in upstate New York or in the tri-state area around New York City without hearing Mel Allen, How About That, and Valentine's Beer. And I'll tell you, I to grow up on Dizzy Dean, Mel Allen, and also loving politics as I have for all of my life, probably to my discredit, to different presidents of the United States, and I was fascinated by them. So I more or less have made my living doing the two things I love. I was a speechwriter for in the Reagan administration, and then in the White House for President George Herbert Walker Bush, the father, not the son. And then I've done on the other hand, have been able to write books about something I love, and hopefully bring some pleasure and nostalgia to lovers of this great game, who I think worry a great deal about the future of baseball, and worry they should, in my view.
Thanks, Curt. We're gonna go to Mars, then Dan, then Jim. Mars, you're up.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. This has been very interesting. I have a couple of comments and a clarification.
Yes.
When it comes to, I think it was the 1934 All-Star game, which was played in the Polo Grounds.
Yes.
Dizzy Dean got hit with a batted ball
Right.
when he was on the mound, and they took him to the hospital to see if he suffered what type of head injury he suffered. And the doctors examined his brain and commented, "We found nothing there."
X-rays showed nothing. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Dizzy Dean was a legend, obviously on the field, but I think it's fair to say that he and Vince Scully, who are about as different play-by-play men as you could ever have, but the most popular national broadcasters ever to do the game were one Dean and two Scully. I wish we had.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Yeah. The second question I have, you mentioned 5 radio networks and 1 television network aired the 3-game playoff in '51.
Yes.
I was only 4 years old and really didn't understand the game. But my pop was listening to the radio at work with Les Kiter, with Russ Hodges' call.
Yes.
But the clarification I have, was it Ernie Harwell on WPAX that did the TV, or was it a major network?
He did CBS. Not every game was broadcast on television. The
Well,
third
the
game
third game, was it Ernie Hardwell on the
Yes.
TV network,
Yes.
or was it Gordon?
No, he was on the
McClendon?
TV network. He did the CBS television broadcast of the game. And
Harwell.
Russ Hodges was on Giants Radio, WMCA, on their network. So they basically did it, and this was, as you may remember, very much in vogue at one time, when announcers would actually do a game solo. I mean, the games weren't from here to eternity, so they could actually, broadcast the game with one person for 2.5 hours instead of 4.5 hours by the 5th inning. That's a
So that was
slight
Harwell
exaggeration.
on CBS.
That's right. So Harwell's
Okay.
on CBS Radio, but the point is, in 1951, as I mentioned, that although 10,000 people a day were buying television, the number of radio receivers still vastly outnumbered TV, because a lot of people felt mistakenly that, well, television's a passing fad, it's no big deal, and radio will keep its prominence, its preeminence, and of course it did not. The key is that Harwell's call was saved by a Brooklyn waiter who was an actual Giants fan by the name Lawrence Goldberg, as I recall. And the radio call, however, was saved, as I just mentioned, by Lawrence Goldberg, but the TV call was not saved. TVs then TV events, if they were saved at all in the early 1950s, and for a long time in television, were filmed on kinescope. Kinescope was about the size of a regular TV screen, so they were very bulky, and you didn't save television calls because of that, because they took so much space in your basement or garage or wherever it was. So they simply threw them out. That's why Harwell said, only Mrs. Harwell and I knew that I also did one of the most famous moments of all time.
Pardon me.
And my third
Sure.
comment was about Les Kiter.
Yes.
When the Giants, the last year we went to the last Giant Dodger game played in the Polo Grounds.
Right.
Giants won 3-2. That was on my birthday in 1957. And after that, I started listening to Recreated Baseball with Les Kiter.
Yeah.
The Dodgers didn't recreate the games, but the Giants did. So, pardon me, the games came on at 11:15 at night, and
Right.
about 4:15 in the afternoon for day games.
Yeah.
I never, there's only one recreated announcer I've ever listened to, and that was Les Kiter. So I
Mhm.
can't really compare him to, let's
Right.
say, Ronald Reagan, who was doing it before my time.
Sure.
But Les Kiter, I mean, I thought he was great. I mean, when a player would steal the base, Kiter would go, and he beat the ball, and then, like, and he struck him out. His pedantic way
You know,
and his sound effects were just like fantastic.
well, the announcers of that time were characters. They had personalities, and they were personalities. They were not told to discuss launch velocity, which God knows they haven't not exist, or the 98 permutations of a curveball, or a two-seam fastball versus 198 pitch that's knuckleball. This lunacy which passes for baseball broadcasting today.
There
The
was
reason
one
that
call
we're-
that Les Kiter made
Yeah.
that, if you've ever seen the cartoon of Bugs Bunny, rounding the bases in the
Yeah.
cartoon, it was like the Mambo, well, Ed Brassu, what I thought was an inside the park grand slam or a candlestick, turned out to be a 3-run homer. That call seemed to be go on for about 5 minutes
Yeah.
as all these people were circling the bases.
The beauty of radio, isn't it? It's interesting because Kiter did broadcast the Giants from 58 through 60. I frankly think that one reason they probably did was that Horace Stoneham, who, although he betrayed New York, was still a sentimentalist and a Giants fan at heart, wanted to preserve that tie to New York. I would bet anything about that. Walter O'Malley, however, the day that he said goodbye to Brooklyn, he kissed it goodbye forever. They did not make that same attempt, at least as far as I'm concerned, and I've talked to people who were living in New York at the time, is as if he wanted to basically sever any connection between New York and Los Angeles. It was to begin anew.
If Horace was so sentimental, he would have kept the team in New York and tried at least to go to New Jersey or keep them in the New York area. So as far as being sentimental, he left the largest market, which was kind of amazing,
Well, both
to
of
go
them.
to San Francisco.
There's no excuse, in my view. Again, I don't remember either team, which is an indignity that I suffer through life. But just listening to that and knowing what happened, I understand that the Dodgers and Giants were afraid that the population was changing. I realized that they both thought of their ballparks as defunct and useless, but I think O'Malley was a stronger personality, at least in my reading, than Stoneham. He
was also a
Stoneham
self-made
on.
man.
Yeah, he
Stoneham
was.
was
Well,
a silver spoon rat.
But Walter O'Malley betrayed his hometown. I don't get that. I mean, I tried to understand it. I do understand it, but I don't forgive it. At least in the sense of what kind of a person would betray his very home? There was no need for the Dodgers to leave. 13 years in a row, they'd drawn more than 1 million people. When O'Malley went before a year later, when he was safely ensconced in Los Angeles, and he goes before a congressional committee, and he basically had to open his books, and he admitted that the Brooklyn Dodgers over the last 13 years had made more money than any team in baseball.
That's right.
You draw your own conclusions. Stoneham,
Well, the conclusion I have for that is O'Malley saw the gold mine in LA, which was, they're building the freeways, and
I understand why.
The city
why
built the ballpark, that he eventually owned the ballpark. He purchased it from the city. He purchased the land from the city. Originally, it was all LA.
He didn't have to
let's go to Dan Taylor, the man with the golden voice.
Keep me online. Curt, thanks for doing this. This is terrific. Following up on Mars and Les Kiter, your research, was Les Kiter the last man to ever do major league recreations? I have to assume in Hawaii, he was the last to do minor league recreations.
Well, I mean, I our crack research staff at the Hall of Fame could answer this for sure. My guess is yes, he was. Simply because, you know, you had both leagues expanding to 20 teams and then 24. More of the country was being covered by the existing major league franchises. Nobody was you know, recreation seemed somehow passe, somehow 1950s. Now we're into the 60s, and basically you have new teams like Houston, and then of course the Los Angeles Angels, and going back to Washington after the Senators had betrayed that bird. So more of the country was covered by the Major League Baseball franchises. Therefore, they felt that there was less need for recreations into markets perhaps that were not served. So I think the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you.
Thank
So let's
you.
go up to the fellow Rochesterian, Joe Jim.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Curt. Really.
Gary, keep me
Good to see
online.
you.
You got it, Frank.
Okay. What I wanted to ask you about was, we all know we were lucky to get the Russ Hodges call recorded
Right.
by happenstance. But what's the history of when they started recording radio broadcasts? And I'd ask you, I really enjoyed your book, A Talk in the Park.
Thank you.
For the broadcasters that came before you, did you get a chance to listen to them, or
Yeah.
how did you develop those stories? How much was recorded?
Well, you know, the first entire 9-inning game that was recorded was in 19, if I recall, 34. Yankees and the Tigers. Babe Ruth, with his great sense of drama, actually homered in that game. We had snippets before them that were somehow saved, and so people can access them now. But really, when you're talking about the pioneers of the game, whether it be Hal Totten or Harold Arlen or Franz Klaus or any of the broadcasters that came before 1939, remember New York in its infinite wisdom, the city of New York, the Dodgers, Giants, and the Yankees, they didn't allow radio until 1939. So there's nothing of them. Other cities, far more enlightened in this case, looked at radio as a way to make new fans. They understood how radio could swell interest in the game, not simply preserve what fans baseball had. So through the 20s and the 30s, you know, because of a rare collector somewhere in Muncie, Indiana, or San Antonio, Texas, will come up with something in the attic that maybe preserved a segment of a game. And then more often than not, to the great credit of the Baseball Hall of Fame, they know who to contact, and that is Cooperstown. And so Cooperstown, to this day, has without question, is the greatest repository of baseball radio TV. The portraits, the voices, the interviews, the play-by-play, and it's really quite amazing. I'm a little biased because I'm from New York originally, but my first trip to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown when I was 12. I'm no longer 12. I have been to the Hall of Fame for research, or to talk to people, or to interview, or to use their writing facilities. I've been to Cooperstown about 70 times. And the Hall of Fame never, ever loses its novelty. It's really quite peerless in that sense. I think that every time you go there, it's as if you're going for the first time. It's a step back in time. They don't try to, unlike Rob Manfred, that noted baseball savant, they don't say, well, let's start, you know, a 10th inning by putting a runner on second base. Hey, that's a great way to preserve the sanctity of the game. And so a writer trying to write any kind of book about baseball is enormously enriched by the fact that the Hall of Fame is so close. Notice I say Hall of Fame. When you want to go to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, you say the Pro Football. When you want to go to the Springfield Pro Basketball, you say Pro Basketball. When you go to Toronto, the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I love hockey, but you say hockey. But the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown is the only Hall of Fame in the entire country whereby if you say simply Hall of Fame, they know precisely what you mean.
Do they have recordings of Reagan doing Cubs games, or were any of those preserved?
I had access to that, having, you know, written for him, basically cabinet members and working for Bush in the White House. So I was able to talk to people at the White House, at the Signal Corps.
Yeah.
They helped me to some extent as well. But I do believe that they exist. And the reason I feel sure is in 1988, when Reagan was leaving the White House, he was constitutionally not allowed to run for a third term, even though amazingly at 77, polls showed that he would win overwhelmingly if he could run again. But he instead had a farewell tour of sorts, one of which he went to Wrigley Field to talk with Harry Carey. Yeah, there's a pairing. And, so you had Carey talking about what an old radio man Reagan was. And that's at the Hall of Fame as well. Priceless, absolutely priceless. Harry Carey, incidentally, I'll be asked from time to time who the greatest announcer is. And that's pretty easy. It's Scully. I have never met, literally, I'm putting my hand on the good book if I had one here, never met one announcer who has said anybody but Vince Scully. However, if someone were to ask, who is the broadcaster in Major League history who has loved the pastime most, which I admit is an arbitrary question, my answer being arbitrary too, I wouldn't hesitate a second before saying Harry Carey. He was the greatest salesman, perhaps, for baseball who ever lived.
Well, thank you again for joining us tonight. It was nice to see you again.
Well, thank you. You're very kind.
Thank you, Jim. All right, here is our lineup now. We're gonna go Steve Rothschild, then Andy, Harvey, Bill Pivnik, Steve King, and then Frank. Steve Rothschild, you're up.
Thanks, Gary. I'm actually sorry I came on late. I may have missed something. You did mention Vince Scully in Upper Manhattan,
Yes.
living there. He went to school, and I've said this before, 1 block from where I taught for 35 years. He went to
Really?
the Incarnation School.
The
which was a
parochial school, yes.
on 75th Street between
Yes.
St. Nicholas and Audubon. And
Right.
Mars, I got to make a correction. Those recreations, they were 11:15 at night, but the day games were at 6:06. Recreated by Les Kiter and brought to you by Northwest Orient. Airline. And
Well, thanks
and
for the
the last
clarification.
thing, and it may not be involved, it may not really be part of this,
Mhm.
is there were television broadcasts once they left New York, and I know it was the Giants, and I'm pretty sure it was the Dodgers too. Whenever they were in Pittsburgh or St. Louis, Channel 13 covered them. I think it was Jack Buck. I could
Yes.
be wrong. Somebody here may be able
Yep.
to correct me.
Yep.
And I remember one game that I think Mays walked on Vinegar Bend Mizell, who couldn't keep a runner on, stole second, stole third, and came home in a wild pitch. So they did cover the Dodgers, at least in those two cities, I think.
Okay, that was
Thank you.
1958.
Correct.
And the reaction of the Giants and Dodgers games as they were broadcast in 57 had been, because they were leaving, it was so sentimental and so nostalgic, if you would. They were so fine that in it was either 58 or 59, Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch came up with the concept of broadcasting, I think it was 44 games between them, the Giants and the
Pittsburgh and St. Louis.
Dodgers, yeah, in the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Those were the two markets.
I
So they were basically away game, yeah, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, mostly Philadelphia. And the reaction was baffled, absolutely baffled. Jack Buck, in fact, said that was his introduction to the national audience. And he gives all the credit in the world for everything that happened next to him in coming years. And of course, he was one of the great talents ever in baseball.
Right.
And nobody had satirical sense of humor like Jack Buck. And but he became acquainted through those games to New York, and New York became more important, acquainted to him. And so he was basically able to do the ABC Game of the Week in 1960. Then he went to join NBC and CBS, and of course, he broadcast Game of the Week for CBS at 2 different times in his career. So yes, you're absolutely right.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. Delighted to
Andy?
be here.
Andy, you're up.
Curt, just absolutely fantastic presentation. I
Thank
read
you.
your book, The 100 Greatest. Your attention to detail is incredible. A little shout out for, we have a friend who we lost, Ed Lucas, who was
Yes.
hit in the
Yes.
eye.
Right.
You mentioned something similar happened to the great broadcaster Ken Coleman, but of course he maintained his eyesight and
Yeah,
broadcast.
Ken Coleman was hunting when he was very young. He grew up in Ohio. No, he grew up in Massachusetts, then moved to Ohio. He was hunting, and a stray BB in some fashion removed the eyesight in one eye. But he never complained necessarily, and he was very stoic about it. He was a terrific human being. I wish we could get him in Cooperstown to get a Frick Award.
Oh, he's
That's
not
true of
in-
so many broadcasters. That's
I-
another
I'll-
subject entirely. But Coleman was the voice of the 1967 Impossible Dream Red Sox, indelibly linked on radio. He did the radio games that year with the Impossible Dream Red Sox, who restored, of course, the love that New England had had historically for the Old Town team. Today they're more, they're as popular as ever. Coleman gets a lot of the credit, it would seem to me, for that.
I'll just go quickly if I may.
Sure.
Flawless telling of the Mr. Reagan story. For the
Yeah.
record, Mr. Reagan laughed. It was Billy Jurgis who popped up first pitch. Ernie
Well,
Harwell.
He said, Augie Galan. I've read.
Oh, he
you know,
did.
it's
There's
interesting.
one
I've
tape
seen
where he says
Jurgis,
Jurgis.
I've seen Galan. I've
Okay,
seen someone else. I've gone to the Hall of Fame. They can't tell me. So I don't know.
okay.
Nobody's wrong in this case.
Right. With Ernie Harwell, he always said plum assignment. Mrs. Harwell was the only one to listen. And
That's
then
right.
finally, Bob Wolf, who I knew, he was my broadcasting teacher. Talk about something he talked about was very important to get a job, pouring the beer on live TV, live commercial.
Yes. Well, Bob Wolf was, as I said, nature's nobleman. He was a friend of mine ever since my 1920s when I began to do the research for Voices of the Game. And he was more helpful, as helpful or more helpful than any broadcaster that I worked with in preparation for Voices of the Game, and then with other broadcasters as well. He was the mentor to so many people, always had a moment of kindness and instruction based upon the fact that he had been there. He knew, not simply theoretical advice, but really ball and strike advice. And he never swore once in his entire lifetime. Rick, his great son, the baseball author, had told me that. And Bob just had, as I said, growing up in upstate New York in the 60s, I could listen to Bob Wolf mesmerize the English language, Dean destroy the English language. What a wonderful grounding in prose, I can tell you. But yeah, the story that he told about warm beer and cold beer had to do with Mel Allen. And that is that they wanted Bob to basically start to pour, be sort of a beer tender. That is someone who could beer keeper, bartender of sorts, who could open up a bottle of beer and then artfully pour the beer so that the fizz came to the very top of the glass. He was expert at that. So he practiced this all winter. And the beer had been kept in the cold refrigerator. And this is what Bob basically was involved with, was pouring cold beer. And he'd become a Rembrandt of the art of pouring a beer. So anyway, we go to the first game of the season. They take the beer out of the refrigerator, and it's warm beer at the time. So there's something to do with temperature, which increases or decreases the amount of foam at the top of the glass. So Bob Wolf had manfully, masterfully, all winter poured beer. He opens the can of beer, the bottle of beer, and he starts to pour, and it overflows the cup. I mean, he looks ridiculous, as he has said. And of course, they couldn't understand why. And then they fixated and found the reason that a difference in beer temperature has a great difference in terms of the actual foam itself.
Thank you.
But that was
Andy.
Bob Wolf. The title of his memoir, one of the great books he wrote, was it's not how you play the game, rather how you pour the beer. He was just a wonderful human being.
Thanks, Andy. Harvey, you're up.
This was a marvelous presentation.
Well,
It's-
thank you. You're
it's
very kind.
Absolutely. I can't really come up with the right words. I want to, Mars always gives me some idea after I listen to what he says. I listened to Les Kiter when I was a kid also.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite calls, and again, everything was recreated, was Willie Mays going from first to third. And Les would say, "You should see him run," and I would see him run in my own head. There was Willie going from first to third.
Sure.
I have a question. You were friendly with President Bush 41 and President Reagan. Bush 41 played baseball famously at Yale.
Yes.
I wonder if those two guys ever talked baseball, and if you were in the middle of it.
Not in my presence, because by the time I had worked for Reagan, but not dealt with him on a daily basis, unlike Bush, whom I dealt with quite regularly and particularly on certain speeches that were privy to me. We would work close together by fax and by computer, and more to the point by phone and telephone. But I know they did, because every week, Bush, who is the quintessential vice president. I mean, if you were to pick a vice president, a perfect prototype for vice president, it would have been a Bush. And he learned so much from Ronald Reagan, the stylistic elements of the presidency among them. He would tell me that. But I know that they talked baseball, because if you look at the 1980s, when Reagan was president and Bush was vice president, Washington had no organized baseball team, major league at the time. The Orioles were in Baltimore. The Rangers had taken the Washington Senators in 1972. So baseball had been without, or Washington had been without baseball for a decade. And Reagan helped reinvigorate interest in the capital in baseball. For example, he would helicopter to Memorial Stadium in Baltimore, and he would throw out the first pitch. There being no first pitch in Washington, of course. He would stage baseball events on the south lawn of the White House. He is the one, Reagan, who began the every year invitation of a visit to the White House for the teams that won the World Series, the NFL Championship, the NBA Finals, and the Stanley Cup. And Reagan would have a blast with that, because here he is, former baseball announcer, now president of the United States, and he would enjoy immensely the welcome of the Baltimore Orioles. I remember one year, the Pittsburgh Pirates another, and the Oakland A's, different teams in the 1980s, as I recall. Bush, of course, had played the game, had coached the game, had managed the game, had been a captain of his baseball team at Yale, had been an absolute artisan with the glove. I remember an old timers game in Denver in 1984, and Bush at that time was something like 60 years old, and here he is, the flashy dad at first base. He's a left-handed thrower, and of course he's got the glove on the in the right hand, and he somehow, a line drive was hit behind the first base bag. Bush dove behind the bag, made a dazzling stop, typical Bush, with great extroversion. He was a teenager in many ways at heart, and he would race to the bag and then extended his arms like this. He was, he was back playing baseball at Yale at the time. And, so he and Reagan lunched every Thursday with his vice president, George Bush. First time ever. Really set a prototype for presidents and vice presidents ever since. And Bush told me that they would talk about baseball. Bush, of course, followed it very closely all of his life. Reagan, not so much after he had gone into Hollywood. Although Reagan, of course, played Grover Cleveland Alexander, the winning team. In many ways, the cinematic highlight of his career. And but no, it was very important what the two of them did on baseball's behalf in the era in which there was no baseball team in DC. There is a team there, at least in part, because of the interest that they planted.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Harvey.
Wonderful.
Phil Pevnick, you're up, Phil. Phil, unmute.
I got it. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Curt, this is just a real thrill. I remember buying the book, The Voices of the Game, the big hardcover,
Yeah.
I think 1987 or 1988.
Right.
And I just was mesmerized by every word because I'd never seen, I've always been interested in broadcasting and I did some minor league ball myself, but to have a 500 or 600 page book outlining the history and every single broadcaster was just, it was mind boggling to me. And it was still my favorite book. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. Voices of the Game was a book that I began in 1983. I finished the book in 1986. So I spent more than three years working on the book. There was no computer. There were no computers at the time. I literally wrote every word longhand and then retyped the longhand writing. My writing is so illegible. There were some things I could not even read when I went back to it to decipher. And so I then typed the manuscript, and this is what I submitted to different publishing houses. It's interesting, given the fact that Esquire magazine very kindly had a survey, had a story, cover story a couple of months ago, in which they named the 100 best baseball books ever written. They were kind enough to put Voices of the Game among the 100. It almost didn't get published because it was so big. I mean, I had written, I think the first edition was something like 600 and almost 700 pages long. And I had several publishing houses say, we want to publish this book. We will if you cut it in half. Good luck. So I had to continue my search. A baseball publishing house, which sadly is no longer existent, Diamond Communications, published the book. And thank goodness for them, because when the book came out in 1987, I had a number of young broadcasters, much like yourself at the time, would call me or be at a book signing, and they would say, this is a book that I've always wanted to get, even when it didn't exist, because there was such a vacuum of pertinent story on these people who were really American institutions and remain so today.
Thanks again, Curt. The one broadcast I do want to ask you about,
Yes, please.
nothing to do with the Giants, is Milo Hamilton.
Yes.
I know he had a kind of a weird career where Harry Carey seemed to take his place wherever he went. And I believe he's a Frick Award winner.
Yes.
But when I used to listen to him, I saw him a little bit doing the Cubs and listening when XM started doing the ball games. And I know he became an institution in Houston. I was very disappointed with him. It was almost like he was mailing it in. To the end of his career, and they made him such an institution there. But it was really kind of pitiful listening to him. He lasted maybe 15 years.
Well, what's interesting? Milo broadcast Major League Baseball from, when was it? 1952, I think, was his first year with the Cubs. His last year broadcasting was in the 20 teens. He broadcast for about 65 years. He broadcast for 7 different teams. He was dismissed by the Cubs twice. And the irony is, I'm a little biased in Milo's favor because I would talk to him. There was a plaintive quality to him, and I can understand this. Harry Carey at two different times in his career had been responsible for Milo losing a major league job. He despised Carey. You know, I would talk to him because I knew him quite well. In fact, I'm a little biased toward Milo because he came to my wife's and my wedding and danced with my mother-in-law, my wife's mother. So he gets points in my book, of course, for that. But boy, you know, he had all the tools as a wonderful announcer. He had a great voice, great voice. He was born in Iowa, middle American voice. He could tell a story. He loved the baseball. He had a baseball history, a baseball DNA to him. His hero as a kid was Ducky Wucky Medwick of the St. Louis Cardinals. And he was a Cardinals fan growing up in the great Midwest. And he could tell a story. He had broadcast more highlight games, as baseball defines it, than any broadcaster in history. Henry Aaron hit his 714th home run. Curt Gowdy was on NBC. Ben Scully was on the Dodgers, and Milo Hamilton was on the Braves. They broadcast the same game. They each have a distinctive style, but Milo Hamilton's call is the call that is replayed today. It's not Scully's call. And Scully did a marvelous call on Henry Aaron's civil rights in the South. Curt Gowdy did his usual pedestrian and fine broadcast, but Hamilton brought a color, a vibrancy, if you would. There's a new champion, home run champion of all time, and his name is Henry Aaron. I think he was a person who, my reading of it is, he was dealt some bad hands in part by Carey, in part by luck, in part by the fact that he let wounds fester. He could never get over the fact that Harry had been responsible. I mean, they really, you know, didn't get along well at all, and had been responsible for Milo's dismissal because Harry was simply more popular, meant more to the ball club. And he became the Astros voice for the last 25 to 30 years of his career. He was exorbitantly popular in Texas. And I always felt, you know, I should have said something to him, geez, you know, let it go. You've got a state that worships you in Texas, in the state. He couldn't do it. And I do think there was an element of mailing it in. Not totally. He was too much a professional for that. But he was a great Hall of Famer who belongs in Cooperstown, but somewhat of a sorry state and sorry story as well.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
Curt, we have four
Yes.
more. Does that work for you?
That's terrific.
Okay. We're gonna go Steve King, then Frank Lewis, Paul, and then Joe Goldfarb. Steve King, you're up.
Hi, Curt. I'm a U of R alumnus. They were an Oriole affiliate when I was there. The unfortunate thing was when the season started, we were all in finals week, and then the season was over before we got back to school. So I don't think any of us went to see them, except I had one classmate who went to summer school who actually got to a Red Wings game.
Yes.
I have a question, but I also
Sure.
wanted to mention to you my all-time favorite recreation of any sporting event was William Shirer, the man who wrote Rise and Fall of the Third Reich.
Yes.
When he began his career, he was a reporter at the Paris edition of the Chicago Tribune. And they used to get the quarter by quarter scores of the top football games, Harvard,
Right.
Navy, Harvard, Yale, and they recreated the whole games. They made them up from just those quarter scores. And he said it was disconcerting. They'd be walking through Paris for weeks afterwards. These people would be talking about plays that had never happened, you know, great runs and passes and all. But I love
Yeah.
that. But I have a question for you. And I
Sure.
wondered if you have any thoughts of it. It's always fascinated me that Hodges, Allen, and Barber were all sons of the South, yet they made their fame in
Yes.
New York.
Yes.
And I wonder if you have any thoughts. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
Ed Scully was a New Yorker, but he really became most famous for out in Los Angeles.
That's right.
I was just wondering if you have any thoughts about
Yeah,
why
I
that
do.
was.
I do, and in fact have written about this, I think in Voices of the Game and perhaps another book as well. You're absolutely right. The wonderful broadcasters that we can think of, Mel Allen, how about that? Red Barber with his cracker barrel humor, much nicer a person, I am told, on air than off. Lindsey Nelson, a grand stylist with the New York Mets in the 1960s, the very definition of the Mets. Lindsey once said that the early Mets played for fun. They weren't capable of playing for anything else. And then Jimmy Dudley, the great siren sweet announcer of the Cleveland Indians, who was from suburban Virginia. I think it has to do with, as Ernie Harwell once told me, and nobody could explain the tenor and the tempo and the poetry of baseball like Ernie Harwell. And he said, you know, we grew up on our front porches in small towns, far from from the major cities of the South. And he said, the radio was our link to the outside world. More to the point, he said, we would sit on the front porch on a Saturday or perhaps Sunday after church, and we would listen to our elders tell stories. This is how they communicated. This is what baseball meant to them. This is what life meant to them. It was a story. You told a story and it ricocheted onto another tale, to another anecdote. And I think that was one aspect. Ernie certainly felt so. The other was that baseball is at heart a summer, a seductive, a lyric, a leisurely sort of sport. Well, what voice more befits those qualities than the Southern voice? So smooth, so Southern smooth, so easy to take, day after day after day, especially when the season is 162 days old. And so this is it, I think, whether it be an Allen or Barber or Lindsey Nelson or Dizzy Dean even, or Pee Wee Reese, who came from Kentucky. Their voices were of a piece with the sport that they described, and they were able, in terms of language, because of how they'd grown up, where there was no television, there was radio, limited so, but it was a reading and a telling of tales. This is what prepared them, I think, and I know Ernie did, to broadcast the game that we love.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Frank, you're up.
Well, I have a number of questions to ask. First, is it true that the guy who taped the Bobby Thompson home run got paid something like $20 or $30 for it?
No, it's not true. He paid $10 for it.
Now,
inflation wasn't as torrid, obviously, in the early 1950s, and I think he didn't know, frankly, what it, you know, the enormous value that it would ultimately develop.
Now, what is the financial incentive? I got one more question after this. What is the financial incentive for broadcasting ball games? As far as I know, the only people who listen to them on the radio when they're riding in cars. Why do they continue doing it? It seems like it's a financial money loser.
Well, I don't know. I can suppose, and I think the suppositions are built on fact. Number one, baseball is the perfect radio sport, and radio is the perfect baseball means. As Ernie said, nothing happens until the announcer says so. The announcer matters more to radio than he does to television. Nothing happens. Again,
most people have access to TV other than people riding the cars. Now, there's one prominent announcer.
Well, now wait a minute. As well as that, it's a good question. One is that it's the perfect summer sport, which means it's the perfect sport to be heard in cars. So the listening audience is greater in the spring and summer, people on vacations, than it is today. This is the reason for the enormous success of Major League Baseball on cable radio today. And so it is true that radio plays a secondary sport as opposed to television today. And that's fine. We live in a different atmosphere. What bothers me is that baseball is so clueless, by and large, about how to announce the game. And it remains a storytelling medium. Reagan told me once that whether it's a book or a play or a ball game or a speech. You tell people 15 facts and one story, and it's the story we remember. Why? Because human beings are human, and we react in a human way to stories being told. So it does work. There's an audience for it, much less at home today. But you know, people in the summer, they're in their backyard, they have the ball game on, they're on the back porch, they're cooking steaks. So there's a place for baseball. As long as baseball wakes up and begins to understand how to broadcast the game and how not to. You don't broadcast the game with statistics. Dizzy Dean called them statics. And he didn't know how right he was, because statistics are static. They're dull, they're boring. Who cares about a launch velocity? I mean, we've just endured a number of years with Joe Buck and John Smoltz on network television. And each of them, I'm sure, are fine announcers in their own right, but they're consumed by statistics, by statics, launch angle, how many seams in a fastball. Who cares? Make me laugh. Tell me something I don't know. Get a rhubarb going with your partner. Make it interesting. Give us a reason to listen and to watch.
Last
One more.
question, Frank, hurry up.
I noticed that you never mentioned Howard Cosell.
I wouldn't. He was not a baseball student. He was at one time, and then he was upset emotionally when the Dodgers left Brooklyn, upset because he had a radio program involving the Dodgers on WABC radio. There was no reason. I understand why he was put on ABC, because he was a personality. He brought nothing to that broadcast. He's not like John Miller, who's a genius, and I'm going to talk about him at great length in August. But you know, John Miller gives you everything you would want in a baseball announcer and more. But he was a baseball fan at heart. Howard Cosell was not.
Okay, thank you for all of this.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Paul, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, Curt, thank you so much for tonight's presentation. Just wonderful.
Thank
I
you.
have just two very quick questions. One is, when these guys came into the business, what was their background generally? Were they entertainment? Were they trained in entertainment? Were they entertained in news? And then the other, my little question is, how did you become a Red Sox fan? And God bless Jerry Remy.
Well, I credit my mother. She was born in Worcester, Mass, 40 miles from Boston. We would spend spectacular summer vacations going to my grandmother's house in Worcester, where I would listen to Curt Gowdy and Ned Martin and Bob Murphy at one time to do the Red Sox games. And so I inherited it from my mother. And I'll never forget my first trip to Fenway Park, and how no matter where you went around Boston, didn't matter if you ever went to a game at Fenway, but you would hear Red Sox games on the radio. Ice cream center, a diner, in cars as you stopped in a parking lot. Next to you, Curt Gowdy was on. And I remember thinking, geez, you know, the Red Sox are 24/7. Of course, there was no term 24/7 at the time, but it just impressed me what religion was in the Boston Red Sox, in terms of the 6 New England states, and by extension, expatriates like my mother, who then went to college in New York and got married to my dad, and they raised a Red Sox fan.
Yeah,
But
I
no.
grew up in Pittsfield.
Oh my goodness! Well,
So I saw Carlton Fisk and Reggie Smith and George Scott growing up as a kid, and it was wonderful.
The Boomer, that was a wonderful club, and of course they were part of the '67 Impossible Dream. But you ask about the backgrounds, and that's a terrific question. It's not like today, where you go to Broadcasting 101, you're taught how to be a broadcaster. There's a certain format. Forget individuality, forget any showmanship, forget any interest. Just give us numbers, bore us to death. Great way to build a following for a sport. However, the Mel Allen was a lawyer. Red Barber was a literature major at the University of Florida, who wanted to be a teacher. Dizzy Dean, of course, didn't get past second grade, and he said I wasn't so good at first either. Lindsey Nelson did public relations for Dwight Eisenhower in World War II in the European theater. And, he had a checkered and a wonderful background, but it had to do with communication. Everything Lindsey did was communication, whether it was on behalf of General Eisenhower or whether it was on behalf of teams at the University of Tennessee, of which he was an alma mater. All of these broadcasters invented their own style. Ernie Harwell, for example, growing up in Georgia, his style was invented, as I said, by slow and leisurely tales taught in the Southern summer. They were all products of their own background. They brought that background, they brought their personality. They had one thing in common, besides a love of language. It was a love of baseball. And they knew how to entertain. Harry Carey, another wonderful, Harry Carey was an orphan. He wasn't adopted until a little bit later in life. And he was dirt poor when he was growing up. He would work, try to get a nickel, and he would take the nickel to the public library, and he would take out books. And this is how we learned how to read and how to have a vocabulary. But they're all different. And Harry Carey often said that the key is that you have to know when the game sells itself, or when the game speaks for itself. For example, when it's 2-1 or a 3-2 thriller, and when you have to speak for the game, let's say a 21 bore fest, right? Then you have to step in and become Harry Carey, as opposed to a straight line balls and strike umpire if the game is 2-1. He understood showmanship. So did Nelson. So did Allen. Is how about that? My mother, I'll never forget, this was after Mel Allen had been banned from baseball. And he underwent a decade-old boycott in effect. Well, one day, this would have been 1976, and This Week in Baseball debuts on the air. And of course, Allen became This Week in Baseball. And from the end of her and my father's home, I happened to be there that weekend. From the end of the home, she traverses about 3 rooms, and she says, and keep in mind, she couldn't have heard Allen. It would have been impossible to have heard Mel for 20 or for 12 or 13 years. She says to me, I can't believe it. Is that Mel Allen? So this is the kind of staying power that all of them have. And instead of becoming clones, numerical clones that bore us to death, I wish to heavens that they would be given the permission, if you would, to sort of roam astray, to be an entertainer, to be a Bob Prince, for example, voice of the Pittsburgh Pirates, who tells you everything but the score, but was so entertaining about it that you made it part of his style. Those are the ones that last.
Thank you, Paul. Joe, wrap it up, Joe.
Okay, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. You touched on one of the people I wanted to ask you about, your recollections of Bob Prince.
Oh, well, Bob Prince was my college announcer. I went to school at Allegheny College in Pittsburgh, about 90 miles north of Pittsburgh. Pardon me, but I had listened to Prince since I was little. And this goes to the power of radio. Again, KDKA, Pittsburgh, 50,000 watts. Growing up in upstate New York, it would come in as if it were in the adjacent county. And Bob would talk about the weather. He'd be talking about Bing Crosby, or he'd be talking about some fan that was garishly dressed. He would say of a pirate rally, we had him all the way. He would say of the buccos, in essence, pardon me, we had him all the way. He would say a bloop and a blast as well. But he always said that he coined it, not Kiter. But the point of the matter is, there were a home run became you can kiss it goodbye. On carpet, he would say that it's as snug as a bug in the rug, not the artificial turf. So he just kept you fascinated. Stephen Blass, the former great Pirates broadcaster and an announcer, told me several times that he felt that Bob Prince was the single greatest personality, meant more to the franchise than any figure in history, even more than Honus Wagner or Roberto Clemente. I can't think of greater praise than that.
Thank you. Quick question. Last one that comes to mind is Ralph Kiner.
Yeah. Kiner was part of the trio, of course, of the 1960s Mets. This is what you're referring to, right?
Yes.
And he and Bob Murphy and Lindsey Nelson became what I call the Three Amigos. And they were a stunning compendium. They compounded one another and they complemented one another. And if you go on a computer, on the internet, you will see one Kinerism after another, one marvelous malapropism, which in its own way was like Yogi Berra. In its own way, it made eminent sense. He would talk about the early Mets and Casey Stengel, and he once said, if Casey Stengel were still alive, he'd be rolling in his grave. It doesn't make any sense, literally, but of course it made eminent sense. And he was when the Mets were formed in 1962, George Weiss, their former GM of the Yankees and then GM of the Mets, wanted three things in a broadcast team. One was to have a bona fide National League star. I mean, this is important. The Mets were going back to New York after the National League had abandoned it in 1957. So they got Ralph Kiner. He was a man who had a greater home run frequency, I think, than any man in baseball history. Certainly ranks among them. Bob Murphy Weiss wanted a dependable professional, and Murphy, of course, was that, to give it a solidity. And then he wanted a national celebrity, and Lindsey Nelson became the national celebrity. And they went out and in 1962, their first year, Mel Allen and Red Barber were still at riding high with the Yankees, and the Yankees won World Series in 61 and 62. So Nelson, who had at one time more than 100 sport coats in his closet, went out and got the most garish sports coats that he possibly could. He went to a men's clothing store and he said, "Give me all the sport coats that nobody else will buy." And in fact, one of his checkered sport coats hangs in the Hall of Fame. He was inducted in 1988. But it was a marvelous trio, and Nelson and Kiner still Kinerisms. Just go to Google and look up Ralph Kiner and Kinerisms. Okay, you'll be very happy you do.
Thank
you, Joe.
Gary, I think Nelson bought his sport coats in a place in your town.
Marsh's?
Yes.
Yeah, it's no longer business. Curt, before we wrap it up, I just have two comments. First of all, it was fabulous. That's not my comment, but you were talking about Bob Wolf. That put a smile on my face. I did not see the perfect game, a no-hitter, a perfect game. But I do remember, and Andy will know this, he did the Knicks games, and the Knicks were losing by 19 to the Milwaukee Bucks. And they came back and won, and his words were, "What a game! What a game!" And it was just fabulous. And I started this talk today talking about my father. And my father always said what you said. He would quote Frankie Frisch and say, "Oh, those bases on balls." And now I know exactly where that came from. So
yes.
It was an amazing show tonight, Curt, and we cannot thank you enough. I will send out that link to your website, so anybody here who's interested in buying and purchasing any of Curt's books will do so. And we look forward to seeing you in the summer with your recollections of the Giants announces in San Francisco. And just let's all give it up for the people who still here. Curt. Fabulous,
Well,
really.
Thank you very much. It's been a treat, and I'll work this summer to make sure that I don't bomb in my revival come August. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Appreciate it. You bet now.
Be well.
Bye bye.
Take care. Take care, Curt.
Ah.
I gotta say, Paul, you look